In this lesson, we're going to be learning about the strings. A string is a collection of characters enclosed inside of quotes. So we're going to start by creating strings. So here we have creating strings. To create a string, you enclose characters inside of a quote. It can be a single quote, it can be a double quote, or even a triple quote. For example, we can have something like name is equal to John. We can have description is equal to a very nice person. Then apart from using the single quotes, you can as well use the double quotes. So I can have something like gender is equal to, this time around, I'm going to be making use of the double quotes. So I'm going to have female. So you have the option of using either the single quote or the double quote. It's just a matter of preference. But here is the rule. If you are using a single quote at the beginning, you have to use a matching ending quote. So here we have a single quote, and at the end, we'll have a single quote. And in this case, we'll have a double quote at the beginning, and we'll have a double ending quote. If I try to end this with a single quote, I'm going to run into a syntax error. So you have to ensure that the quotes match. So I'm going to remove this and end it with a double quote. You can also create a string using triple quotes. You can have something like occupation is equal to, this time around, I'm going to be using double triple quotes. So you can have farming. You can as well decide to use single triple quotes, something like 1, 2, 3, and here I can have farming. And like I said before, if you are using single quotes at the beginning, you have to use single quotes at the end. Triple quotes are normally used for documentation purposes. So if you want to create strings, you either use the single quotes or the double quotes. Now, let's look at how we can create an empty string. To create an empty string, you simply provide an empty quote. So we can have something like name is equal to, I'll simply provide an empty quote. So this is an empty string. I can as well decide to use double quotes. So this is also an empty string. Then you can decide to create a string containing a white space. Something like this, you just include a space. So if you want to create a string containing a space, you simply provide a space inside of the quotes. Now, you can easily display the strings on the terminal using the print statement. So here we can have print name. We're also going to be displaying the description. So we can have print description. Then finally, we're going to be displaying the gender. So here we have print gender. Now let's run the program, and from the output you can see our text displayed on the terminal. Now let's look at how we can access the characters in a string. So here we have accessing characters in a string. And like I said before, a string is a collection of characters. And as a collection, I can access the individual characters that make up the string using indexing. So here we're going to have fruit, which is apple. If I want to access any of the characters inside of this string, I can make use of the index. So The first item or the first character inside of a string has the index of 0. This has the index of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So to access any of the characters, all you have to do is to use a slicing operator and provide the index. So here we can have result is equal to, first, I'm going to provide fruit. Now let's say we want to access the first character in the string. I'm going to have a slicing operator and then provide 0. Now let's print out the result. If I run this program, you can see we have A. If I want to access the first P, I'm going to be changing this to 1. Then if I run this program, we're going to get P. Then if I want to access E, E has the position 4. So I'm going to change this to 4, then run the program, and this is going to fetch the E. We can also use negative indexing on strings. So if I want to access the last element, I'm going to provide -1. Then if I run this program, it is going to give me E. If I want to access L, I'm going to change this to 2. If I run this program, it is going to give me L. So you can use either the positive indexing or the negative indexing. Then another thing to keep in mind is that strings are immutable. And what this means is that you cannot change or alter the characters in a string. For instance, if I try to assign this character to a different value, something like B. So let me remove this. If I run this program, I'm going to run into a syntax error. So you can see str object does not support item assignment. So strings are immutable. You cannot alter a string after creating one. Now let's look at slicing. Slicing has to do with extracting a portion of a string. So here we have slicing. And for this, we can have color is equal to yellow. Now, if I want to extract a portion of this string, let's say I want to extract Y and E, I'm going to have, let's say, result is equal to color. I'm going to provide a slicing operator. Here, I'm going to be specifying the start index and the stop index. So I'm going to be starting from 0. And for the stop index, I'm going to be using 2. Now let's print out the result. And here we have print result. If I run this program, we have Y and E. If I want to get the double L here, I'm going to change the start index to 2. And then for the stop index, I'm going to change it to 4. If I run this program, we have the double L. Then if I want to extract the entire characters in the string, I can change this to 0, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to change this to 6. If I run this program, we're going to get yellow. Or better still, I can remove the start, and I'm also going to remove the stop index. If I run this program, it is going to fetch me the entire characters. So this is how we perform slicing on strings. Now, let's look at how we can determine the length of a string. When we say the length of a string, we're talking about the number of characters that make up a string. So here we have length. And to do this, we use the len function. So if I want to determine the number of characters inside of this string, I can have result is equal to len. Inside the len function, I'm going to provide color. So let's print out the result. And here we have print result. If I run this program, we'll have 6. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We'll have 6 characters. So if I remove the entire characters, leaving an empty string, if I run this program, I'm going to be getting 0. Then if I include a space and run this program, we're going to be getting 1. So if you want to determine the length or the number of characters in a string, you use the len function. Now let's look at some of the operations that you can perform on a string. So we're going to be looking at concatenation, and we're going to be looking at repetition. So let's start with concatenation. Concatenation is a process or a way of combining 2 or more strings together. So let's say we have first name is equal to John, and we'll have last name is equal to Kenneth. If I want to join these 2 names together to have a full name, I'm going to be concatenating them. So here I'm going to have full name is equal to first name. Then I'm going to provide a plus operator. Then we'll have the last name. Now let's print out a full name. So here we have print full name. And if we run this program, we're going to have John Kenneth. And if you look at this name, we're supposed to have a space in between the 2 of them. So, but we did not specify this in this operation. We simply joined John and Kenneth together. So if I want to include a space in between the 2 of them, then I'm going to have first name. Then I can provide a space. So I'll have a plus operator. Then I'll provide a quote. Inside of this quote, I'm going to provide a space. So if I run the program this time around, we have John Kenneth with a space. So if you want to join 2 or more strings together to have a bigger string, you use the plus operator, and the operation is called concatenation. Now let's look at repetition. So here we can have value is equal to hello. Now here I'm going to have result is equal to value multiplied by 2. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, you can see we have hello repeated twice. So when you use the asterisk or the multiplication operator on strings, you are performing repetition. So if I want to repeat this hello 3 times, I'm going to change this to 3. Then this is going to give me hello 3 times. If I want to repeat it 10 times, I'll simply change this to 10, and this is going to repeat it 10 times. Now, let's look at some of the built-in method for strings. So let's say we have name is equal to John. John in small letters. If I want to convert these letters to upper cases, I can use the upper method. So here I can have result is equal to name dot upper. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. I'm also going to be printing out the name before changing it to upper cases. So here we can have print name. Now if I run the program, you can see we have successfully converted the characters or the letters to upper cases. Now let's say we have the letters in upper cases like this. If I want to convert the characters to lower cases, I'm going to be using dot lower. So now if I run the program, you can see the letters are now in lower cases. So previously they were in upper cases. Then after this operation, they are now in lower cases. Then we also have the title case. In this case, let me have John in small letters. And here I'm going to change this to title. Then if I run this program, it's going to change the first character to upper case. Let's say you want to determine whether all the characters are all alphabet. You can use the isAlpha method. So here we can have result is equal to name dot isAlpha. If all the characters are letters, it's going to be returning true. If not, it is going to return false. So let's print out the result. And here we have print results. If we run this program, we're going to be getting a true. Then if I try to introduce a number, something like this, if I run this program, I'm going to be getting a false because this is alphanumeric. Now, if you want to determine whether the characters are alphanumeric, then here you can use isAlnum. So this is going to return true or false if the characters are alphanumeric. If I run this program, we're going to be getting true. So even if we have only numbers, we're also going to be getting a true. Likewise, if we have all letters like this, if we run this program, we're going to be getting a true. Then if you want to determine whether the characters are numbers or numeric, then we're going to be using the isNumeric method. So in this case, I'm going to have 1, 2, and 3. Of course, all the characters here are numeric. Now to confirm this, I'm going to be using isNumeric. Then if I run this program, I'm going to be getting a true. But if I introduce an alphabet like a B here, this is going to return false. Now let's look at the strip method. The strip method allows us to remove trailing white spaces. So here we can have value is equal to, here I'm going to have some white spaces. I can have hello. Then I'll have some white spaces. Now I want to remove these white spaces, and sometimes it's part of a data cleaning process. We'll have some white spaces at the left and we'll have white spaces at the right. To do this, I'm going to be using the strip method. So here we can have result is equal to value dot strip. Now let me print out the value before stripping it off. So here we can have print value. Then here I'm going to have print result. If I run this program, you can see we have white spaces here. And then after this operation, we're able to strip out the white spaces. And now we have this. We can only see the white spaces at the left, but of course, there are white spaces at the right. So with the strip method, you remove the trailing white spaces. So if I have something like hello world, so this operation is only going to remove the trailing white spaces. It's not going to remove this white space in between the hello and the world. So if I run this program, we're going to have our hello world. Then we'll have two versions of the strip method. We'll have the L strip and the R strip. So if you want to remove the white spaces at the left, you use L strip. If I run this program, it's going to be stripping the white spaces at the left. Now, if I want to remove the white spaces at the right, I'm going to use the R strip. If I run this program, the white spaces at the right has been removed while the one at the left are still there. So if you want to remove all the white spaces left and right, you are going to use the strip method. So this is a way of removing trailing white spaces. Now we also have the replace method. So here we can have value is equal to hello. Let's say I want to remove this character E and replace it with another character. I'm going to have result is equal to value dot replace. And here I'm going to provide what I want to replace. So I can provide E. Now I want to replace it with A. So let me remove this. So I'm going to be printing out the value before the replacement. So here we have print value. Now if I run the program, you can see originally we have hello. Then after the replacement, we have hello. So let's say I want to replace this O with A. I can have replace O with A. If I run this program, it is going to give me Hella. If I want to replace this double L with a single L, I can have LL. Then I'll replace with one L. If I run this program, we now have this. So if you want to replace characters in a string, you provide the character that you want to replace and the value you want to use to replace the character or the characters. Find method allows us to determine whether a given character or group of characters is inside of a string. So let's say I want to determine whether there is E in this string, or whether we have O in this string, or whether we have LLO in this string. I can use the find method. So here I'm going to remove this and I'm going to have value dot find, and what I'm finding is E, so I'm going to provide E. If I run this program, it's going to be returning the position of this value if it's available in the string. So if I run this program, it is going to give me 1. So the position of E in the string is 1. Then if I try to find O, I'm going to change this to O. If I run this program, it is going to give me 4, which is the position of the O. Then if I change this to L and run this program, it is going to give me 2, which is the first occurrence or the position of the first occurrence of the character. And the first occurrence is in this position 2. I can decide to do LL. So if I run this program, it is going to give me 2, which is the position of this group of characters. So if you want to search for a given character or group of characters in a string, you use the find method. Then we'll have the count method. The count method allows us to count the number of times a given character occurred in a string. In this case, if we want to determine the number of occurrences of L in this string, of course it is 2. We can easily do that using the count method. So here we're going to have value dot count, and here I'm going to be providing the character or the characters I want to count the number of occurrences in the string. I'm going to have E. If I run this program, it is going to give me 1. If I change this to L and run this program, it is going to give me 2. So if I have things like K is occurring 3 times here. If I change this to K, it is going to give me 3. So the count allows us to determine the number of occurrences of a character or group of characters in a string. Then we have the starts with and the ends with. So in this case, we have hello. If I want to check whether this string starts with H, then I'm going to have value dot starts with. Here I can have H. This is going to be returning true or false. If I run this program, you can see we have true. Then if I change this to O, this is going to return a false. The ends with method allows us to determine the characters that end a string. So we can have something like value dot ends with. And here I'm going to have O. So this is going to be returning true. Then if I change it to LO, it's also going to be returning true. So we use this to determine what starts our string, and we use this to determine what ends our string. Now, we're going to learn how to split and join strings. And here we have the split method, and we'll have the join method. The split method allows us to break strings into pieces, while the join method allows us to join two or more strings together. So let's start with this example. Here we have value is equal to hello dear. And here I'm going to have result is equal to value dot split. Then I'll provide a parenthesis. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, we're going to have hello and there. When you use the split like this, you are telling Python to break this into pieces anywhere it sees a space. In other words, we're going to be having this and this. So let's say we have hello world there. If I run this program, we're going to be having three strings. We'll have the hello, we'll have the world, and we'll have the there. So this is the same thing as having a space inside of this parenthesis. If I run this program, it is going to give me the same outcome. So what this means is that break this string or split this string anywhere you see a space. Now let's say we have these words separated by hyphens like this. If I want to split this string anywhere there is a hyphen, I'm going to have hyphen inside of the quotes. So if I run this program, it is going to split this into three words. If I try to use the split method without providing anything in the parentheses, it will still give me the original string. Now let's say we have hello world, and instead of a hyphen here, I have a space. If I run this program, it is going to split this string into two. We're going to have hello world and there. So if I run this program, we're going to have hello world and there. Now, if I use a hyphen and run this program, we're going to be getting hello. Then after the hello, we'll now have world and there. So this is how we split strings. Now let's say we have string of words separated by commas. Let's say we have apple, we'll have orange, and we'll have grape. I may want to split this string anywhere there is a comma. So here I'm going to have a comma. Now, if I run this program, we're going to be having apple, orange, and grape. So whenever you want to split a string, you can use the split method. If you want to split by spaces, you can simply provide the split method like this. Then if you want to split maybe when it encounters a given character like a comma or hyphen, then you are going to be providing the character. So this is how we split strings. Now let's look at how we can join strings, and we use the join method to do this. Let's say we have a list of strings. Here I can have words is equal to, I can have how are you. I can have sentence is equal to, I'm going to start by providing an empty quote. Then I'll have a dot. Then I'll have the join method. Then inside of the join method, I'm going to be providing the lists. Now let me print out the sentence. So here we can have print sentence. If I run this program, we're going to have how are you. Then if you notice, the words are not separated by spaces. So if you want them to be separated by spaces, I'm going to be including a space inside of this quote. Now, if I run this program, we're going to have how are you properly spaced. Now, if I want the words to be separated by hyphens, instead of a space, I can have a hyphen. If I run this program, we're going to have how are you like this. So, but what I want to do is to separate them by spaces. So I'm going to provide a space. Now, if I run this program, you can see how are you. So the split method allows us to break strings into pieces, while the join method allows us to combine strings together. Now, let's look at how we can format strings. Here we have the F strings. We'll have the format method, and we have the percentage method. Now let's start with the F strings. Now let's take a look at this example. Here I have result is equal to oranges. I can have something like value is equal to 3. If I want to insert this value inside of this string, I can make use of the F string. So I'm going to start by having an F before the quotes. I'm going to provide a placeholder. And to provide a placeholder, I'm going to be using curly braces. So we'll have a pair of curly braces. Inside of those curly braces, I'm going to be providing value. Now let's print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, we're going to have 3 oranges. With the F strings, we can be able to provide expressions of values into our strings. Instead of having value inside of this placeholder, I can decide to have an expression. I can have 5 plus 2. If I run this program, first, it is going to evaluate this expression, then combine the value together with the oranges into one single string. If I run this program, we're going to have 7 oranges. Now let's take a look at another example. Here I can have result is equal to, I'm going to have the F, then a quote. Here I'm going to be providing 2 placeholders. So I can have this, then I'll have this. But before I proceed, this is exactly what I want to achieve. I want to have something like 3 red balls and 4 blue balls. For the first placeholder, I'm going to be providing 3. And then for the second placeholder, I'm going to be providing 4. Now within the quote, I can have 3 red and we'll have 4. Then after the curly braces, I can have blue balls. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. So here we can have 3 red balls. Now if I run this program, we're going to have 3 red balls and 4 blue balls. So if you want to perform string substitution, you can use the F strings. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the simplest methods of performing string substitutions or formatting in Python. Now let's look at the format method. Here I'm going to have result is equal to a quote. Then I'm going to have format. And inside of the format method, I'm going to be providing 3 and 4. Now for the quotes, I'm going to be providing 2 placeholders, one for 3 and one for 4. So I'm going to have a placeholder and a placeholder. Here I'm going to have red balls. I'm going to provide a space here. And I'm going to have blue balls. Now let's print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, we're going to have 3 red balls and 4 blue balls. Then I can decide to change the order. With the current arrangement, this placeholder is for this value, while this second placeholder is for the second value. If I want 3 to enter into the second placeholder, I can change this to 0. Then for this first placeholder, I can change it to 1. Now, if I run this program this time around, we're going to have 4 red balls and 3 blue balls. So this is basically how to use the format method. Now let's look at the percentage method. For this, we're going to have a quote. Inside of this quote, let's say we want to display 3 red balls. So here we can have red balls. And where I want to provide 3, I'm going to have a percentage sign followed by S. Then after the quotes, I'm going to provide a percentage. Then I can provide the value. So I can provide 3 here. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, we're going to have 3 red balls. So if I want to include the space, I'll simply provide a space here. And this is going to give us 3 red balls. Now, if I want to achieve 3 red balls and 4 blue balls, I can have something like percentage and S will have red balls. Then afterwards, I'm going to have and I'll provide percentage and S. Then we'll have blue balls. Then for the values, I'm going to have 3 and 4. I'm going to be wrapping this inside of a parenthesis. Now, if I run this program, we're going to have 3 red balls and 4 red balls. So this is how we format strings in Python. We'll have the F strings, we'll have the format method, and we'll have the percentage method. Now let's look at escape sequence. There are certain characters that are difficult to be represented as strings. Things like tab, things like new line, things like including a quote inside of strings. To handle this, we use the escape sequence. Now let's take a look at this example. Here we have result is equal to hello. There. Now let's say I want to put a tab in between hello and there. It will be difficult for me to do this. But with escape sequence, I can be able to do so. To do this, first, I'm going to have the backward slash. Then I'm going to provide a T. So this is the escape sequence for tab. So if you want to represent tab in your string, you use this sequence. Now let me print out the result. So here we have print result. If I run this program, you can see we have a tab. Now, if I want to have a double tab, I'm going to have the backslash, then the T. Now, if I run this program, we're going to have two tabs. We can also use the escape sequence to represent a new line. Let's say I want the hello to be in one line and I want the there to be in another line. To do this, I'm going to be using backward slash and N. So let me remove this. If I run this program, we're going to have hello in one line and there in another line. There's a space here, and this has to do with this space between the escape sequence for the new line and the there. So I'm going to be removing the space. Now, if I run this program, the space disappears. Now, let's say we want to have line 1, line 2, and line 3. So we can have something like line 1, line 2, and line 3. And I want all these things to be in different lines. So here I'm going to put the escape sequence for a new line. So this is going to push this into a new line. If I run this program, you can see that we'll have line 1, then line 2 and line 3 are in another line. Now, if I want to move line 3 to a new line, here I'm going to have new line. Then if I run this program, you can see that we'll have them in different lines. So if you want to introduce a new line, you use this escape sequence. Now let's say I want to introduce a quote inside of a string. I may want to have something like, how is everyone? Of course, this is a syntax error, and this has to do with introducing a quote inside of another quote. To fix this issue, I can either have a double quote here. If I run this program, it works well, but this is not what we intended to have. We wanted to have a single quote. To handle this, I'm going to put a backward slash and then provide a single quote. So this is an escape sequence for a quote inside of a quote. Now, if I run this program, it is going to work out well. Likewise, if I have double quote here and I have a double quote here. Now, let me change this to a double quote. We're going to have a syntax error. So I'm going to be escaping this quote using the backward slash. Now, if I run this program, it is going to work very well. So escape sequence allows us to introduce characters that ordinarily would have been difficult to be represented in strings